In this clip, we'll learn about the two main tools for creating texture on our assets here inside of Mari. Okay, so in the last clip, we learned a little bit about the first of the two tools we're going to learn more about in this clip, the basic painting brush. Now we know that it's right over here, and the keyboard shortcut for it is P. But before we dive any deeper into it, I want to go over a process that may seem easy, but inside of Mari, it's a little different than you might expect, and that's erasing paint. So we've got some blue paint that's been baked onto the front of our little crab's head here, and let's say we want to erase that. Well, we do have an eraser right over here, but you may have noticed that we can't use it to erase that paint. So what you should understand about this eraser is that it only functions on paint before it's baked down. That paint actually has to be inside the paint buffer. We can use the E keyboard shortcut to switch back to it, but you can see now that I've got some paint in my buffer that has not been baked, I can now come in and begin to erase that paint. So you're probably wondering to yourself, well, if the eraser only works on unbaked paint, how do I get rid of this paint that's already been baked? Well, we actually use the paintbrush, just exactly like we used to actually paint that color. We can actually use it to remove that color as well. And it really comes down to this painting tools toolbar, or this toolbar right here for tool properties. Now this toolbar does change depending on which tool you have selected. You can see as I select a few, it shifts. But when we're using the paintbrush, there is a painting mode drop-down. And this is very important because we need to change the painting mode from normal to clear in order to remove this paint. Now you'll notice there are a tremendous amount of painting modes that we can utilize, but if our goal is to remove paint from a layer that's already been baked, clear is the mode you want. So now that we have that selected, I can come over and I can begin to paint away my blue paint. Just like so, and the paint's gone. Or is it? Now remember, that is still inside my paint buffer, so if I move my camera, you can see that, well, that clearing paint is actually something that has to be baked as well. So let's just get that repositioned about right there and tap the B key on our keyboard, and that will trigger Mari to actually bake that information into our textures. And there we go. We've removed that blue blob from our little crab's head. Perfect. Okay. Now, the paintbrush is really one of these tools that on the surface, it seems like a very simple tool, but the brush engine that is behind this tool is really very advanced. You may notice there are a few options up here inside of the tool properties toolbar, things like radius and opacity. Now, if I were to come in and turn on my heads-up display, you'll see that there are keyboard shortcuts to control things like radius. If I hold down the R key, you can see that that property up in my tool properties toolbar is changing. And then we have some check boxes here. Now these check boxes correlate to the things that pressure sensitivity is currently controlling with this brush. So if you're using a tablet or some kind of a stylus type device with Mari, these type of things are incredibly useful because it allows you to control the alpha of the brush or the radius of the brush based on how hard you're pressing down with your stylus. Now we can look deep into the brush engine for this tool just simply by opening up the brush editor palette. I'm going to right click and open it up. You can see the keyboard shortcut for it is F8. And let's get rid of that heads up display just to maximize on our screen real estate here. Okay. Now, in looking here inside this palette, you can see there is just a tremendous amount of different properties here that are available to us when we're customizing a brush. And some of these may look kind of familiar to you if you've used Photoshop. The things like spacing and jitter, those are the same terminology. Now, we also have this down here, which is an interactive scratch pad that we can test our brush out on before we ever paint a stroke into the paint buffer. So I'm not going to dive too deep here into the various properties inside this brush editor. This is very deep and we could spend a lot of time going over this stuff, but feel free to explore these on your own. I do want to bring your attention over here though to the shelves tab on the left of this palette. There are some tabs here. You can see they look pretty similar, but there are a number of different tabs right along here on my Shelves tab. Now, each one of these tabs is going to contain something different. Now, the first two are empty. And for my copy of Mari, this is just the way I keep these. But let me tell you a little bit about these. The menu tab here, anything you store on this tab is actually accessible through Mari's Pie menu. It's a pretty cool feature, but I just don't utilize it a whole lot in my own workflows. The personal tab here, these are things that will persist no matter what project you work on. So if you want to create custom brushes, store colors, things of that nature, you can do that here and they will be there for each and every project that you work on. Now, if we scroll over to the right here, you'll notice there is a project tab and it is also empty. Anything you save on this tab will only exist in the current project you're working on. For example, this one. So in between those empty tabs, we have some tabs here called like basic brushes. And now we're starting to see some information. These are alphas that can be used as a brush tip. So if we click on one of those, you'll see here that my brush stroke changes based on what we have selected. So these are really neat, and what I would recommend if you're just getting started painting textures inside of Mari, start using some of these basic alphas that ship with Mari before worrying about creating your own custom brushes. Some of these get pretty advanced. You can create some really awesome texture with just these basic brushes. Once you've got used to the brush engine and you're comfortable with it, there is a process for bringing in Photoshop brushes. Up here through the Tools menu, you can actually import those. I'm not going to go through that in this clip, but there is a process that you can bring those alphas over into Mari. Now, painting color is pretty cool, but in looking at the textures that I've got going on this little crab guy, you can see that a lot of these textures have more of a photographic quality to them. And this is actually something that Mari excels at. So to wrap this clip up, I want to switch really quickly over to the Paint Through tool. And what we can actually do inside of Mari is we can use images as paint. Let me actually open up the image manager. This is important because in order to do this, you will need to have brought some images into your project. And you can see I've brought a few of them in here. Now, these won't be inside your exercise files, but I'll include a text file with links that you can download these. I don't have the rights to redistribute these, but they're free to download if you follow those links. So we can come in and double click on this guy. And you can see this is a really interesting texture, and most of these, the inspiration for the textures on this creature, I've taken that from butterflies and moths and their wings and the pattern of color and texture on those wings. So now in order to use these as paint, we use a tool called the Paint Through tool. You can switch to that by tapping the U key on your keyboard, just like so, or you can simply take one of these images, maybe this one for example, and drag it over to the canvas. And that will automatically switch you to the Paint Through tool. Now Mari's loading up that image. You can see that one was actually pretty large. Let me go ahead and just stretch this out a little bit. Now this image looks like it's in the paint buffer, but it's not. It's just simply hovering over kind of the mesh. Now, obviously it's a high resolution image, so I need to shrink it down so I can get some of this detail proportional to my mesh. Now, again, these keyboard shortcuts are all in the heads up display for this tool. You can see there's quite a few of them here. But in order to shrink this down, you can hold Control and Shift and drag, and that's going to scale the image. Just like so. Now, once we get it to a size we're happy with, we can actually reposition it by holding down the Shift key, and that will translate it. Or we can hold the Control key, and we can rotate that image. One thing you're probably noticing here, though, is that it's really difficult to see the mesh through the image. So what you can do is actually hold down Shift and use the minus key, and that will change the opacity of that preview. Shift and plus will increase the opacity. So I'm going to take that down just a little bit here. We'll maybe increase the size of this. And again, this particular tool is one that uses Mari's brush engine. So all of the settings that we just looked at inside the brush editor palette, we can actually utilize with this particular tool as well. Now, I about made the mistake that I warned you about. I about forgot to change my painting mode from clear back to normal, so that would have prevented me from applying paint. I will switch that now. And now, once we do that, we can actually come in here and begin to paint this image right into our paint buffer. So you can see I'm starting to add the texture of that image onto what looks like the surfaces of our mesh. Let's just go ahead and stop right there. And now this is something that is just like paint. We need to bake this down, because if I move my camera around, you can see it's floating inside my paint buffer. I'll go ahead and bake that down by tapping the B key. And if I tap the P key to switch back to my paintbrush, we can see here that that image has now been incorporated into the textures that I'm working on for this particular creature. So this is a very, very powerful tool, and I can honestly tell you that between the paintbrush and the paint through tool, these are the two main tools that you're going to be using in creating textures for your assets here inside of Mari.